In this video, I'm going to attempt something that many people have strived towards. I'm going to try to save the world. When I say save the world, more like looking for ways that we can actively stop ourselves from destroying it, and answer the burning question on what British Muslims can do for the environment. I'm on England's Jurassic coast to journey through the historic landscapes and find answers to the questions plaguing environmentalists for years. Behind me are the cliff markings that show the historic age of the Earth, brushstrokes that show just how long this floating rock in space has been here, spinning for centuries. But humanity as a whole has only been living on this cosmic sphere for a heartbeat. Eventually, as all things do, this time will come to an end. But until it does, what are some things that we can do here and now to help save the world? So here we are at the beginning of our journey to save the world, where we'll traverse down England's Jurassic coast, venture through the beautiful coastal towns, and experience the stunning scenery. However, the first thing we should talk about on our quest to save the world is why should we care? This is Lyme Regis Beach, one of the best locations on the Jurassic coast to find prehistoric fossils. Now, do I have any experience with finding fossils? No. But how hard could it be? The best way to find fossils on this beach is to look at low tide, focusing on shingles and mudslides. So this is an entire mudslide over here. This is an entire mudslide. You can see all of that debris came tumbling down, and it was raining this morning as well. So really this is ideal conditions. So if I can't find a fossil, it's more because of me not being able to find one rather than the beach. Fossils often have distinct symmetrical shapes, which you don't really see in ordinary rocks that are found in nature. So they're actually quite easy to distinguish from just ordinary rocks that you see on the beach. I'm also looking for shiny gold pyrite, as fossils can also be found in those pockets. Will any of this actually lead to me being able to find a fossil? I guess we'll see. While I wrestle against the futility of my actions as I look for fossils on this beach, it's a good time to talk about where Muslims stand when it comes to the environment. When it comes to the religious doctrine, there aren't any explicit guidelines for environmental conservation or environmentalism, but although there aren't explicit instructions on how to treat the environment, like there are for things like prayer or inheritance, the spirit of the law is very clear. It is in the second chapter of the Quran in Surah Baqarah that Allah informs humanity of its position on this earth. He says, "I am going to place a successive human authority on earth." The specific word that is used is khilafah, which means a steward or caretaker. We've been placed on this earth as a steward to nurture and protect it. This concept makes environmental preservation a core religious duty, as every single Muslim is considered a caretaker of the natural world. Later in the Quran, we are then told of the moment when the sacred trust or amanah was placed onto humanity by God. In the 33rd chapter of the Quran, in Surah Al-Ahzab, the 72nd verse says, "Indeed, we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they all declined to bear it, being fearful of it. But humanity assumed it, for they are truly wrongful to themselves and ignorant of the consequences." This verse shows us the magnitude of the sacred trust that has been placed in humanity. Even the heavens, the earth, and the mountains were offered it, but they were afraid that they would not be able to uphold the rights of all things, and in their failure, they would be punished. However, humanity, in its ignorance, did not decline to bear it. So we have to uphold that responsibility, that trust that has been placed in us, and stand up for the rights of all beings of creation, including the very environment that we live in. Because if we don't uphold the sacred trust, if we become neglectful and fail to protect the things in our care, then we will be held responsible and be subject to the consequences. So you can tell that this is quite a popular area for people to come to look for fossils, because you see a lot of these kind of rocks, which are broken open geodes, and you can see the outline of the fossil that was removed. Isn't that cool? I am looking for an actual fossil though, rather than just an outline. See, look, here's another one. Look at that. Amazing. I'm actually not sure what they look like if this is the outline. Am I like expecting an actual spiral? I really should have done more research. And I should have brought a hammer. I guess I'm not worthy. Couldn't find anything. And my parking's running out, so I think it may be time to make tracks. But I did see something quite cool over here. Let me show you. This is an outline of a massive fossil that was created on this boulder. You can see the spiral shape of the ammonite that was preserved on this very rock millions of years ago. A fossil is a preserved creature that has lived millions of years ago. When they died all those millennia ago, their bodies were preserved and turned into fossils that we can find today. These fossils, these testaments of history, show us that as a species we have walked these shores for a very short period of time. And although we've been granted the amanah of the earth currently, that responsibility didn't always exist, and it's something that could be lost if we don't do our jobs well. Now that we have an understanding of the Muslim stance when it comes to the environment, I think it's a good time to look at how we can save it. The next stop on our quest to save the world takes us to this beach, Quayside Beach. Over here we see one of the worst impacts that the human race has on the environment, and that is human waste. In the UK, around 520,000 tons of waste is generated every single day. This is a combination of household, commercial, and industrial waste. With millions of tons of waste being generated every single year, we see an unfortunate consequence all around us: litter. The creation of rubbish and waste is an inevitable consequence of being alive. When things get used up, they have to be discarded. And in the UK, with a population of around 70 million people, that means a lot of waste. However, what extenuates this problem is the epidemic of overconsumption that we are currently living in. Whether it is fast food, fast fashion, or fast delivery, as a society we are creating more waste than ever before in human history. Whether it's electronics, clothes, or plastic wrappers, all of these things are being made with materials that will take thousands of years to break down. And because of that, we find a lot of it ends up in the ocean, and then inevitably on our beaches. So while Voice Over Me looks at the Islamic perspective of wastefulness and overconsumption, I'm going to be getting out some plastic bags and get started on my mission to save the world by doing some litter picking on this beach.
Extravagance and overconsumption are actions which are explicitly prohibited in the Quran. In Surah Al-A'raf, it says, "O children of Adam, dress properly whenever you are at worship. Eat and drink, but do not waste. Surely he does not like the wasteful." And it is that specific word, israf, or wastefulness, where we get the prohibition of extravagance. The point where an action becomes extravagant or excessive is unique for each individual person. Everyone has different needs and different capabilities. A builder who is working for hours a day in the same jeans might need to replace them every few weeks once they've worn through from wear and tear. That doesn't make it overconsumption. But someone buying their 20th pair of designer trainers, which they rarely wear just for the clout, and isn't doing it because there is an actual need, is engaging in the very overconsumption and extravagance that has been prohibited. We are actively seeing the consequences of this culture of living life in excess, and we are beginning to understand the wisdom behind the prohibition. This overconsumption does not just create personal consequences, we are seeing the environment and climate around us being destroyed by the societal shift towards excess. From mining to manufacturing to marketing to merchandising, we see how the planet is paying a high cost because of our high consumption. Mining quarries are destroying the environment and polluting the skies. Sweatshops are engaging in slavery to reduce manufacturing costs. Constant advertising in every avenue in life is being done through manipulation and fear, and the very selling and financing of items is being done at a rate higher than ever before in human history. This overconsumption cannot be sustained, and it can either be reduced through controlled, active steps taken by every single person, or this entire system will just snap and collapse all around us. Extravagance and overconsumption are both activities that can only be truly regulated through personal actions. There isn't a specific criteria that you can use to identify what is overconsumption. It is just through personal evaluation of our own circumstances. But the path that we are currently on as a species is a path to the climate collapse, and the only way to stop it, the only way to save the world, is to make that conscious decision to step off this path and decide that you are going to save the world.
I'm going to be honest, there actually wasn't that much litter. Good job, Newquay City Council. Newquay, sorry, made that mistake last video. However, one of the pieces of litter I did find was a small cut-off of nylon wire. Now you might be thinking on the grand scheme of things that's not that big of a deal. However, the problem is nylon is a plastic polymer. And plastic waste is one of the biggest problems that humanity is facing right now. This piece of nylon wire isn't just staying on this beach. It doesn't just stay on this beach, it ends up in the ocean, and then it ends up all over the world, and then it doesn't just stop there. On average, humans are ingesting up to 5 grams, about a credit card's worth, of microplastics every week. And this specific consequence is repeated in so many different aspects when it comes to how we're treating this planet. Whether it's plastic in the oceans, greenhouse gases in the air, or melting ice caps at the North Pole, the impact will always be felt by humanity in the end. Humans are the khalifas of this planet, but as this beach is testifying, our caretaking has been a bit lacking lately. We have a responsibility to this planet, and now we have a responsibility to save it. And it can be as simple as picking up your rubbish and putting it in the bin.
After all that walking around Quayside Beach, I feel that it's time for some dinner, even though it's only 3 PM. But if I wait any longer, I'll be cooking my dinner in pitch black darkness. We'd stopped to pray Maghrib, which meant it got very dark. So now the original plan that I had, or the place that I was going to go, no longer works. So we're gonna have to figure out a new location to cook our dinner, because I am quite hungry.
So it got pretty late to make dinner, so it's quite dark, but that's no problem because I have lights. I don't know if I lined up properly, but it's okay. Alright, now that we can see, let me see. For my dinner, I'm going to be cooking steak and potatoes, and talking about why steak is probably the worst meal you can have for the environment. But first things first, I need to get a fire lit. Now I was going to use some fire stools like he does in Outdoor Boys, but it took a long time setting everything up. So I'm just going to use my lighter. I'm just going to make one big fire. Just going to take out all the wood and then arrange it so that it burns nicely. And make sure that this bag doesn't fly away. I don't want to be adding to the plastic waste. Let's just put these big ones to the side. For now, I think my lighter might run out. Well, I guess we're using fire steel anyway. It's too windy. Lighting a fire on the beach is always a pain. It has some twine and some cottonwood buds. One thing we're not short of is wind. Block off the wind, or block the wind from all these areas. Got there in the end. Jeez, that took a while. Let's cook our food while there's heat. It might not even cook, that's why I got steak. Steak doesn't really need to be cooked all the way. Potatoes first. When it comes to food, the only requirements that most Muslims look for is whether or not something is halal. However, that is not the only thing that should be looked at when you're eating your food. This brings us to the concept of tayyib, purity in Islam.
Tayyib means purity, and it is a concept in food that goes hand in hand with permissibility or halal. In the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Baqarah, it says, "O humanity, eat from what is lawful and good on the earth, and do not follow Satan's footsteps. He is truly your sworn enemy." So what does tayyib actually mean? Well, where to make meat halal and permissible to eat requires ritual slaughter at the end of the animal's life. For something to be tayyib, you have to look at how the animal has lived its life. Has it been reared and looked after in an ethical manner that takes the animal's well-being into account?
Roll right the way through. I thought they were pre-boiled. That's pretty burnt. Okay, so sit rep. The ones that are completely burnt on the outside are kind of sort of done on the inside. The ones that aren't burnt on the outside are completely raw in the middle. Alright, let's start cooking the steak directly on the coals. Oh, there's so much plastic waste on this. Wow, it's plastic wrapped within plastic. Okay. Like that. Now some of you may be thinking to yourselves, I always make sure that my food is halal, so shouldn't that mean that it's tayyib as well? But unfortunately, that's not always the case. When it comes to halal certified abattoirs, the only criteria that's really being monitored is whether or not the meat is halal. They don't take into account the lifetime of the animal, and whether or not it's been looked after properly, and also whether or not it's been kept in good conditions. This takes us to the topic of factory farming.
Factory farms are large-scale facilities where thousands of animals are raised for food in confined, mostly indoor environments. Factory farming is an industry production methodology which prioritizes reducing costs and increasing the speed and yield of meat from each farms. Practices which are adopted to be able to achieve these goals leave the animals in cramped, confined conditions which often lead to injury, disease, and chronic stress. Chickens raised in battery cages receive floor space the equivalent of a sheet of A5 paper. Even though these conditions the animals are kept in are well documented and publicly known, these practices still continue because they are the most economical way of being able to meet such high demand for meat. With current society eating more meat than ever before, it incentivizes factory farms to keep existing because the supply will always be met with demand.
Thank you, VoiceOver Me, for that detailed and informative explanation on factory farming. Now I guess we can sit back and enjoy this burnt steak and also even more burnt potatoes. Except for now we need to talk about the environmental impact of animal agricultural farming.
Agriculture and farming are always going to be things that are necessary for society, but the impact that different types of agriculture has on the environment is an important thing to take into consideration when looking at sustainability. When talking about animal agricultural farming, the best way to understand its impact is to compare it to crop-based agricultural farming. Let's take two fields, each one a hectare in size. On one field, let's grow some potatoes, and on the other field, let's rear some cows for beef. So an average stocking density per hectare, that's how many cows you can keep for each hectare you have, is 3. So in this field, we have 3 cows, compared to the potatoes, where we have planted approximately 50,000 potatoes. So we'll probably be getting a bit more food from the potato field than from the cows. With such a big difference between the amount of food that can be grown per hectare, it's easier to compare the two by looking at 1 kg of each thing. And now when we look at things like greenhouse gases production, like carbon dioxide and methane, water usage, and even the impact on fields and ecological systems, we see that meat production is much more taxing on the environment. Animal agricultural farming makes more greenhouse emissions than all other farming practices combined, and the amount of space that is required to farm a kilocalorie of meat is 50 to 100 times more than crop-based farming. Even if all the meat that we are consuming is 100% tayyib, the volumes that we are currently going through is not sustainable for this planet.
This meal has really gone hot. Oh, I'm messing this up so badly.
I'd like to present my meal
Of steak and potatoes. Oh no, oh my goodness. Okay, that's not good. Why did something fine? And you know, it's technically cleaning, it's self-cleaning. Self-cleaning, yeah. I meant to do that. Big brain move. Yeah, oh look. Clean as a whistle now. No grease left. Yeah, it's a little overdone. I would say that's between medium, well, ruined. Yeah. Beautiful. Ooh. That's delicious. That tastes wrong. Cut to VoiceOver Me explaining why animal agricultural farming is very taxing to the environment. I'm gonna finish this food. It's so delicious.
We already did that. Let's cut back to me after I've definitely ate every single bite of that beautifully cooked steak and potatoes.
Delicious. I finished every last bite of that. Now the point I'm trying to make, albeit very badly, it's not about completely cutting out meat from your diet, although that is an option, but it's more about the fact of reducing the amount of meat that we eat overall. So instead of having meat with every single meal, maybe reduce it to 1 meal a day. And then once you've done that, maybe reduce it to once a week, maybe once a month. Point is, whatever point you are at today, try to do less tomorrow, because overall, that will be more beneficial to the environment.
Good morning. It is day 2 of traveling our way down the Jurassic coast. We've made it about halfway to our destination. Let's crack on with day 2 of our quest to save the world.
Our next stop on our adventure down the Jurassic coast is Weymouth High Street, where we can look at how to actually live our lives in a more sustainable way.
When it comes to sustainability and caring for the environment, there are some unfortunate realities that we need to accept. We all live on the planet with a finite number of resources that need to last the entire globe up until Judgment Day. And unless you're sitting on a secret calendar that has that day circled in red, we have to assume that's not happening in the near future. That means living life considering how our actions are going to affect future generations who will be born on an already taxed Earth. It's impossible to live a completely net zero life but we don't create any long-term waste. That's just a reality of the society that we live in. Early on in this video, when I picked up litter on the beach, I used non-biodegradable black bags because those are the only ones I could find. But where we do have control, we need to be more conscious of the impact our choices are having. What resources do we necessarily need to take up and use, and what is just consumption for the sake of consumption? And I'm not going to lie, this is very much the call is coming from inside the house kind of situation for me. I'm very much part of the problem. I buy cheap polyester clothes from Primark because it's easier and faster than spending time finding more suitable clothing. So in that vein, I'm going to try and run an errand that I've been putting off for a few weeks and look for some things that I've been needing in a more sustainable way. So first thing I've been needing is a mini HDMI cable to a micro HDMI cable. So hopefully we can find a place that sells one of those. It is quite a niche item that I've been needing. Don't know how lucky I'm going to be, but we're on a quest to save the world. We have to be hopeful.
Here and now in 2026, it has become easier than ever to try to shop sustainably. With sites like eBay, Backmarket or Vinted, the options to reuse and repurpose things has become easier than it ever was before. And online stores aren't the only places that give the option to shop sustainably. Thrifting and thrift stores have become more popular than ever. Unfortunately, with the popularness has also come an increase in the prices that thrift stores charge. However, one location on the British High Street which has not yet succumbed to becoming a trend on the internet is the humble charity shop. On this one high street on the Jurassic coast, there are multiple charity shops, all selling a different selection of items that can be reused or repurposed into a plethora of different things. However, not everything can be bought secondhand, and when that happens, it becomes our personal responsibility to make sure that the companies that we are giving our patronage to are running their businesses in sustainable ways. And sustainable practices are not just limited to the type of materials that the product is made from, but in every aspect of that product's creation. From how and where the raw materials were sourced, to where the manufacturing took place, even the location of the stores that's going to be sold in. We need to make sure that we do our best to only give our money to companies who are not actively destroying, but instead trying to save the world.
Okay, so wasn't able to find what I was looking for, but that wasn't really the point. The point was just to show that there are multiple different avenues that you can go down to find more sustainable ways of getting different items. Now it's time to go to the next stop on the Jurassic Coast quest to save the world. Now, although it's January in the depths of winter and currently -3 degrees Celsius, I want to go for a swim. However, I have a small pet peeve when it comes to water sports, and that's not wanting to go swimming in raw sewage. This is Weymouth Beach, one of the worst affected beaches on the Jurassic Coast when it comes to sewage being dumped into the water. When it comes to environmentalism, there are definitely actions we can do to reduce our impact on the environment. And we've already talked about a few of them, like shifting away from carbon-intensive agriculture and moving towards sustainable practices, like reusing items rather than buying new ones. However, there are also actions that are being done that we as normal everyday people have absolutely no control over. Things like water companies knowingly and willingly dumping thousands of tons of sewage into our waterways every time it rains. Or large multinational corporations pumping billions of tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, while simultaneously lobbying against actions that would reduce the environmental impact they make on the earth. These aren't things that can be stopped through lifestyle changes or alternative shopping practices. These are things that are actively destroying the environment and that we have absolutely no control over. Or so they would like us to believe. I didn't think it would happen this quickly, but yes, this video is turning political. I'm basically every desi uncle now. Acha beta. What we need to understand is that destructive corporations, corrupt governments and politicians, even lazy city councils love apathy. When a population gives up because it seems like such an insurmountable task to actually affect change, that's when the corruption spreads and thrives. In order to live up to the title of caretakers of this planet, we can no longer just sit on the sidelines and only concern ourselves about our own business. Because when the forests burn, the sea levels rise, and the crops fail, it will be everyone's business. Now, I'm not saying that we all need to go and vote for the Green Party. My guy Polanski still has a lot to prove that he's worth that. But voting once every 4 years isn't the only thing that we can be doing. It definitely is something that we should be doing, but that's a video for another day. The opposite of apathy is action. No matter what it is we're doing, anything is better than nothing. Whether that's a post on social media, joining a local club, even a blimmin' lunch and learn at work. It won't be easy because the forces in power want to remain in power, so even small changes will be met with the most resistance. But the small, regular actions are the ones most loved by Allah. And those small changes are the things that chip away at the forces of darkness and bring us closer to saving the world. When it comes to environmental conservation, it seems that we are having to battle against behemoth forces, whether they be giant corporations, superpower governments, or clandestine billionaires. And when you're facing off against an opponent that has unlimited money, resources, and influence, it can feel like a somewhat hopeless pursuit. But when it comes to fighting against a hopelessly overpowered enemy, Islamic history shows us that we like those odds. The date is around about 5 years after the hijrah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. At the time, the Prophet had just participated in 2 battles against the tribe of the Quraysh, the Battle of Badr and the Battle of Uhud. However, now, the city of Medina was about to face one of its biggest challenges yet. The siege of the city of Medina, the Battle of the Trench. So let me set the scene, but in this case, build it.
While I play out my favourite beach activity and sculpt an artistic representation of the city of Medina using a shovel and a bucket, let's add some context to this exceptionally treacherous point in the Prophet's life. At this point in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's life, he had gone through multiple life-changing tragedies, from being attacked and stoned in the streets of Ta'if where he went looking for refuge, to being expelled from his home in Makkah under threat of death from his birth tribe. Then, after making hijrah to the refuge that was the city of Medina, he then had to continue fighting outnumbered in 2 battles, the Battle of Badr and Uhud, the latter of which he was seriously injured in after being hit by arrows in his face. This all was the precursor that led to the Battle of the Trench. In the winter of the 5th year of the Islamic calendar, 1442 years ago, a plot was brewing in the lands of Arabia. A confederation of tribes had grouped together with one goal, the destruction of the religion of Islam. The Arabian tribes of the Quraysh, Banu Ghatafan and Banu Khurayza had amassed an army of 10,000 strong to march upon the city of Medina. The Muslims had already fought 2 battles against the Quraysh, but with this new confederation of tribes from across all of Arabia, the Muslims of Medina were outnumbered 4-1. With an army of 10,000 strong amassing on the plains of Arabia, word quickly spread to the Muslims of Medina, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, conveyed a council with his companions in the masjid to discuss how they would defend the city of Medina against this giant army. With 10,000 soldiers bearing down upon them, there were very few options that they had. The Muslims at the time were no stranger to adversity. During the battles of Badr and Uhud, they had fought against much larger armies, but the odds now looked like they were insurmountable and defeat looked almost inevitable. Then the companion Salman al-Farsi suggested the idea of digging a trench around the city to help defend it. It was a move of desperation as it would only delay the inevitable, but the Muslims had no other choice. Work started immediately on this mammoth undertaking, and every companion started labouring to dig this 2-kilometer long trench day and night. It's at this point, during the digging of the trench, when the Muslims of Medina were facing off an army that they could not defeat, that was hell-bent on exterminating them, with no other allies that they could call on, no secret armies that they could materialize, enemies at the gate and within the city, no plans on how they would survive the winter with the little food that they had, and no path to victory, that our story begins. When digging the trench, the companions came across a massive stone in the ground that was blocking the path that had been marked for the trench. They were unable to break or move the boulder, so went to the Prophet to consult him on what they should do.
The companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, went to consult him to ask him what they should do about the boulder. So he came with an axe to destroy this massive boulder that nobody else in the entire city of Medina had even been able to scratch. And so he lifted his pickaxe and he struck the boulder once, and a crack appeared in the massive rock. And during the time, the Prophet said that he saw a vision of the Muslims in Syria. And then he struck the boulder again, and it cracked again. And then he said he saw another vision of the Muslims ruling Persia. And he struck it one last time, and the boulder crumbled. And he said, I see a final vision of the Muslims ruling Yemen. Now at this time, the Muslims were in one of the most dire situations they had ever been in. They were surrounded by an army of 10,000 hell-bent to come and destroy their entire way of life. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, at that time, he did not despair. Instead, he gave glad tidings to the future, and he allowed the Muslims to be hopeful. It's quite easy to fall into despair and hopelessness when you're faced with such a large task. For the Muslims, it was facing off against an army of 10,000 that outnumbered them 4-1. For us, it's about the climate crisis that we're experiencing, and the fact that our entire way of life, our entire world, is at risk of collapsing because of climate change and the damages that are being inflicted upon the earth. However, as Muslims, we look to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for guidance and for an example to follow. And his example was always to be hopeful, always to be optimistic for the future, even when faced with a challenge that you think you cannot defeat. So it's not befitting for us Muslims to despair and fall into hopelessness and apathy and not do anything because there's nothing that one can do against something like the end of the world. We just have to roll up our sleeves, pick up the axe, and strike the rock. The Muslims were victorious in the Battle of Ahzab. They put their faith in Allah, and it was through His power that the Confederation was defeated. It was the environment itself which turned against the enemies of Islam and caused their entire army to disband. Now, at the start of this video, I quoted the beginning of a verse from Surah Baqarah, the 2nd chapter in the Quran, and it's where the understanding of humans being the khilafah of the planet originates from, the beginning of that verse. But now we should focus on the end of the verse. In this verse, we're told to remember that Allah said to the angels, I am going to place a human authority on the earth. Now in the second part of that verse, the angels ask a question. They say, will you place a person who spreads corruption and sheds blood? Well, the angels themselves glorify your praises and proclaim your holiness. And Allah responds to the angels, I know what you do not know. And that one sentence response to the angels shows us that Allah has placed us on this earth for a reason. And He has placed us as a human authority on this earth for a reason. And it's a reason that He knows. The angels themselves in their wisdom knew that humanity would spread corruption and shed blood. And we see that everywhere today, in the genocide and killings that are being orchestrated in places like Palestine, Kashmir, Sudan. And through the corruption that we're spreading in the environment, we're seeing the very climate changing. But even though the angels said that that was the case, Allah still said that I know what you do not know. It's a testament to hopefulness. It's a testament to the fact that humanity has been placed here for a higher purpose than just spreading corruption, shedding blood, and destroying the environment. And it is our responsibility as Muslims to execute that higher purpose, to be the khalifas of the environment, to make sure that this amanah that has been placed on us is looked after, and to make sure that instead of spreading corruption in the world, we spread purity. Thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum.